Hi everyone, it's Ree here. This is day 8 of the 30-day video challenge, and today I actually decided, in order for me to be able to speak in front of other people, I want to start talking about things that are close to my heart, things that will kind of make me vulnerable. So the story that I wanted to tell today is the story of my son Aiden. Most of you know that he was born with hydrocephalus, or some people actually pronounce it hydrocephalus. Now, hydrocephalus is a buildup of cerebral spinal fluid on the brain. There's nowhere for the fluid to go, so it causes tremendous pressure. It causes death or serious brain injury. And 1 in every 500 children are born with hydrocephalus. Many people can get it from brain injuries, elderly. It's very common, just not a lot of people know about it. I myself did not know about it until my son was born with it. And so I just want to tell you our story of how this all came about and how it's affected our lives. So Aiden, who is now 8 years old, he was born 6 weeks premature, and I actually went to the hospital and I was in labour, and they kept telling me, no, you're fine, you're not in labour, there's no way you're going to have this child anytime soon. And I had him the next day. So much for the hospital knowing that. I actually hemorrhaged during birth, and I lost a lot of blood. And it turns out that, which I didn't find out for a couple of years later when I saw it in a report, that Aiden had a brain hemorrhage during birth, which is what we think caused the hydrocephalus, but no one's ever been able to tell me. I've asked doctors many times and no one's been able to tell me why he has it. He just has it. He was in hospital for a while. One day they rang me up and said, you need to come into the hospital. Your son is sick and we don't know what's wrong with him. That hit me hard, as it would. Newborn baby, something's wrong with your son and they can't figure it out. So I went in. I actually brought my mum in with me because it was something I couldn't do by myself. I was a single mum. I already had another child, Sebastian, who was about 2 at the time. So I brought my mum in with me, and we talked to the doctors. They did some tests, and they did a ultrasound on his brain, and that's when they said there's a bit of fluid build up and that he's been diagnosed with hydrocephalus. But they told me it wasn't to worry about. It was very mild, and that he'd be fine. He didn't need surgery. And I didn't know much about hydrocephalus or what kind of surgery it was. They mentioned a tube, but I didn't know anything about it. So I listened to the doctors. I listened to what they told me. And he was about 4 weeks old when he was allowed to leave the hospital. We had many, many hospital visits. We needed to keep going back for tests and appointments to make sure that he was okay. And we had an MRI done, and the pediatrician called me a couple of days later to tell me the results. I was on the train with my kids at the time, and his words were, your son's brain is shrinking. And at the time, how do you react to something like that? I actually broke down on the train, and Sebastian, being the affectionate child he is and always has been, he gave me a hug, and I had to get off the train. I couldn't be there. So I don't even know what station I got off or where I was. I just got off because I needed to breathe, and I couldn't breathe. So there there wasn't much they were really going to do about it. They were just monitoring him over time, and we got to a stage. He was 5 months old, and he wouldn't let me put him down. He was screaming all the time. It was agonizing. He got to the point where he was sleeping 23 hours a day and drinking about half a bottle a day. And I kept taking him to the hospital and the doctors, and they kept saying he's fine. And then I went to emergency because I said that my gut was telling me something was wrong. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out, like, 23 hours sleeping a day, that's your body's saying there's something wrong. There's something really wrong. And whenever he was awake, he just cried. He cried all the time. He was not a happy baby. And I knew something was wrong. So I took him to the hospital. We waited in the waiting room for about 5 hours. And they wanted to send him home. And I said, no, you need to do a test. You need to do something. And they said, oh, we can organise an ultrasound, but not for another 3 months. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. And they just kept telling me it's just a flu type thing. He's, he'll get over it. And I left pretty angry. And this was very late at night, so there wasn't much else I could do at the time. There wasn't anything I could do. So I took him home, soothed him as much as I could, gave him a nice, cool bath, and all he did was scream. He was in pain, I could tell, and it was heartbreaking. And so the next morning, I called his grandparents, and they took me to the children's hospital in the city, which was about an hour drive away from where we were living at the time. And went in there. He was pretty much unconscious in my arms by the time we got there. And they rushed him in straight away. And I had a nurse come up to me, and because there was about six doctors fighting over him, over who gets his case, because he was so bad that I had doctors fighting over him. And the nurse came up to me and was trying to comfort me and tell me, this is a good thing. This means we're going to get down to the bottom of it. So I thought, at the time, it feels good that, something's going to be done about it. But, I was scared out of my mind. So, yeah, I had a doctor come up to me and tell me that they're going to do an MRI just to see about the how much pressure was on his brain. And they did emergency brain surgery straight after. And they told me another day he wouldn't have made it. So I'm glad I listened to my gut telling me that something was wrong. Even though all the physical signs were there, I had doctors, I had nurses tell me I was paranoid, that, he's just a sick baby and he'll get over it. And I was a paranoid mother and babies cry. I've been told so many different things. And not just before that time, but even to this day. And I always listen to my gut when it comes to these things because I know my child. So that was his first brain surgery. They actually inserted a shunt in his brain. It's called a VP shunt. And it drains the excess fluid down from his brain into his stomach. There are different kinds of shunts, but I won't get into that now. That was back in May 2009, and July to 2010 we were at the shops, and he was sitting in the pram, and then I looked down and he's looking really pale, and then his hand started shaking, and I bent down to his level, and I'm asking if he's okay, and he's not responding. He's just looking up. And then all of a sudden, his arms started shaking and his legs shaking, and he started seizing in the pram. Got him out the pram. I don't know what was happening. I've never seen a child seize before, or anyone have a seizure. So it was really scary. I had a lot of people at the shops help me, and we lied him down on the ground. One person called an ambulance. Another person was watching my other son and trying to distract him from what was really going on. It was about 2 or 3 at the time, so he wouldn't have completely understood. And they were telling me what to do, and he kept shaking, and then he had foam coming out of his mouth. And to be honest, I'm trying not to cry, but I was scared out of my mind. And he seized for, I think, 11 minutes, because that's how long it took the ambulance to get there. And he stopped seizing by the time they got there, and he was just lying there, and I was just talking to him, letting him know it was okay. I don't know if he could understand me. I really don't know, but just saying it to him, letting him know that it's okay. This is something I felt like I needed to do. And turns out there was pressure on his brain again. So he needed a new shunt. The hospital, which I won't name, it was a different hospital. They replaced the top half of his shunt, and then he was okay for a while after that. 4 months down the track, he started throwing up. He was throwing up every day. Took him to the hospital. They kept sending me home. They actually sent me home twice, and they kept saying it's just the flu. It's fine, or it's gastro, And I'm like, it's not. I know my son. He's throwing up every day for 2 weeks, and they kept sending me home, and I'm like, this is ridiculous. So I took him back to the children's hospital because he actually started throwing up blood. I'm like, this is not normal. And they did an MRI and said that he had extra fluid on his brain again. So they did the surgery, and mid-surgery, our surgeon came out and said, your son's shunt is actually filled with dry blood, which means he had been bleeding on his brain for quite a while. The theory was that the last surgeon who was at the hospital before that actually clipped his brain when they did the surgery, and then he'd been bleeding for the last 4 months since then, and that's why he's been throwing up now and why he needed that surgery. So the surgeon actually told me that she was very surprised that he was still alive. And I'm really glad that I think every mother should listen to their gut, whether something is wrong or not. Mothers know when something's wrong. Just do it. And that was in November 2012. And his last surgery was actually, we had just moved house and we settled for about a month, and then all of a sudden he starts just kind of collapsing onto the floor, or he'd just sit there and he'd just lie there on the floor, or he'd pass out all the time. And I took him to the hospital, and I'm thinking, okay, there's something not quite right here. And it turns out that the shunt is actually inside a ventricle in his brain, and that's where the fluid builds up. What was happening with the shunt, it was sitting like on the edge of the ventricle, so it was going in, out, in, out, in, out, so it wasn't getting all that fluid, that excess fluid, out. So the pressure would build up, then it'd go down, pressure would build up, go down. So they did the surgery, they replaced the top half of the shunt again, and he was alright after that. And that was actually his very last surgery. And the longest he has had a shunt in his brain. like the same shunt. So I'm really grateful for that. When it comes to shunts and children or even adults, they say one shunt can last an entire life, but I've heard stories of a 16-year-old having over 100 brain surgeries just because the brain just doesn't like it. There are many reasons why a shunt can fail. It can develop an infection. It can just stop working. If it gets hit, that can cause serious injury for the child or adult. A lot can happen, intellectually. A lot of children have learning disabilities because of it, and when I say that, some don't. Some live a very long, happy, healthy life. But when Aiden was first diagnosed with hydrocephalus, I felt completely alone. Even when I did have people comforting me, it wasn't the same because they didn't completely understand what I was going through. And I did feel alone during that. So for the last 1 to 2 years, I've been working on a project called Drowning on the Inside. And it is a book about hydrocephalus from people who have it and parents or carers of children who have hydrocephalus. And the reason that I'm writing this book is because of the fact that I felt alone. I want to be able to put this book out there so that when a mother of a child with hydrocephalus reads it, they know that they're not alone in this. It's not just like a comfort. It's saying stories of people who've gone through this, who've battled it, who've even overcome it, and found ways to deal with their loneliness, their frustrations, because the amount of times we've been to the hospital, or amount of times I've been told I've been a paranoid mother, when in fact my gut was on point. So that's why I'm writing this book, and that's why it's so important to me. I've been through it, not me personally, but as a family member, as a parent, as a carer, I've been affected by this greatly. And I can't imagine what Aiden goes through. He has headaches and migraines all the time, especially during winter. I could say that he'll have a migraine, a really bad one, once a week, headaches almost every day. And I really don't know how he does it. Okay, so that's me telling my story. I hope that you got something out of it. I really do. I would appreciate maybe a comment. Any questions about my story? I would appreciate it. Okay, so that's me for day 8, and I will see you for day 9.